This is the On Humans podcast with your host, Ilari. I am taking some time off for the holidays, so instead of new episodes, there will be a series of highlights from past conversations. This one is from episode 3 with Professor Ruth Feldman. In the episode before this highlight, we had talked about synchrony in behavior between individuals, how that facilitates bonding and love, and also this really mesmerizing phenomenon that love is actually associated with synchrony between brainwaves of the relevant individuals. Here we take off from there and discuss xenophobia, whether denigration of the outgroups is associated with that very same biology of bonding with the inner group. And we explore also the roots of love in our childhood and what to do if the childhood was, well, in some sense suboptimal and casts a shadow to the present. There's also some data here about the Israeli and Palestinian youths, an intervention that Ruth Feldman's lab organized and tested, as well as some really fascinating data on gay parents. I hope that you enjoy this. Happy holidays.
So synchrony has been a very, very powerful tool in human societies, I would say, across history and cultural communities to make us connect to one another, define the in-group, define family and the society. Also, unfortunately, to derogate those who aren't us. So basically, and I've done some work on that, showing that the biology of love and the biology of hatred are basically based on the same system, the same oxytocin that supports our love to our kin and bonding and family formation and group formation and empathy. Oxytocin also support out-group derogation and ethnocentricity.
How much is that the case? I've seen very conflicting data on this. We actually talked about this in the episode with Patricia Churchland. We both ended up being very agnostic about the strength of that result because I've seen data that speaks in favor of that. But then also, I think in one of your articles, I learned that even with strangers, for example, having eye contact with a stranger has a positive oxytocin response. There seems to be also this capacity to just very rapidly sync with strangers, not just with our family, not just with our loved ones. So it seems to be that in a way, to the extent that the seeds of xenophobia are baked into oxytocin, well, maybe the solution is also, or what do you think about that issue?
So I think synchrony can happen in various degree with our loved ones and with strangers. Yes. I'm not sure that eye contact with a stranger will not in of itself activate your oxytocin system. But it's definitely consistent, put together two strangers in a collaborative task, and you would see brain-to-brain synchrony. I think the question then comes to, and I agree that we don't have good data, not from my lab, and I'm not sure about other lab, but that what happened when someone is perceived as an enemy. And I think our system is much more welcoming to a stranger. I meet a stranger in the street, or there are experiments. Most of the brain-to-brain study, in fact, involved strangers, that two people were asked to do some synchronized or cooperative movement together. And then they showed that while they are cooperating, they do need to take into account the other person's movement and intention and goals. You do need to incorporate in a predictive way the brain activity of the other person when you want to do a collaborative action. The question is what happens when fear gets in the way.
So it is not the fact that someone is a stranger as such.
Right. It would not be evolutionarily viable to activate your fear response to any student that you don't know that's coming into the room or in your work group of strangers. You're now going to activate your fear response. But when somebody is marked as a potential enemy or threat, whether it's from an enemy, in my country, there are clearly generations of fear about the other culture. Sometimes it's racial. There's somebody from another race is marked as dangerous. And I think here a lot of time it filters, or we have even evidence showing that it filters top down. For instance, in the brain basis of empathy, when we measured the brain basis of empathy to the pain Israeli youth of Palestinian and Palestinian of Israeli. So the brain basis of empathy works on an automatic quick response of a half a second, and then a more cognitive response that is longer, that is more top down. And we saw that the brain automatic response to the pain of in-group and out-group was identical and happened to the in-group and the out-group. We have this half a second of grace where we embrace the humanity of all and we empathize with the suffering of all. And after that half a second, those top-down mechanisms that are more cognitive but are critically needed for us to understand what the pain is about and plan our way of helping, those shut down. They only activate to your in-group and they shut down to your out-group. This, in fact, was the basis of our intervention for Israeli and Palestinian youth, 16 to 18-year-old. We built an intervention specifically understanding the affiliative matrix and getting to know each other and doing a lot of poetry reading and scripture reading and cultural activity and dancing and moving together and learning how to dialogue a conflict in a synchronous way. So in those sessions, they learned about affiliation, about prejudice, about empathy, about conflict, and how to dialogue them. And at the end, we show that this altered their brain response. It's like opening empathy to human being rather than opening empathy just to your loved circle, to your tribe, to your family.
Very interesting. Fascinating. Of course, this has a lot of practical consequences, but I'm also interested in what is the role of oxytocin in human relationships with strangers. I think is such a fascinating question because, for example, in one of your papers, you write, quote, unlike other mammals, which require familiarity with conspecifics for biobehavioral synchrony, humans display behavioral synchrony towards strangers, unquote. And we talked about this also with Patricia Churchland about how for her, the origins of our care, our morality is in our being creatures that are born very immature, which requires care in, first of all, in the evolution from the mother to the offspring, later on from other caregivers, and then how this spreads to all other kinds of contexts where we care.
Right.
But then the question is, well, so clearly, as your quote also suggests, sometimes we do care about these total strangers.
Right.
Sometimes we don't, and sometimes it suggests that it is the loving brain that is also responsible for this stigmatization of the enemy. And I guess one of the clean ways to attempt an answer would be to say, oh yeah, well, if it's a stranger within our group, then we can love them. If it's a stranger from an out group, then we cannot. But I don't think it cuts that need. I mean, any good war novel will have these moments where you suddenly see face to face with an individual from the enemy, and the dynamic changes completely. It's no more this faceless enemy with a capital E. It's this person.
Exactly. This is like Levinas when he says, "The face of the other tell me, thou shalt not kill." The minute you face the other
Yes.
in a face-to-face interaction,
Yes.
and you're able to see their eyes and synchronize and see their face, then it can no longer be a faceless enemy. And that activates the biology of care and the brain basis of empathy. I think it's true that all mammals are born immature and require maternal caregiving, but like if you look at primate evolution, humans are the ones born with the most premature brain. We have with about 20 to 25% of our brain wiring, and the vast majority of our brain maturation occurs in the context of the parental caregiving and the culture, whatever surrounds the mother. So how the love we receive, how those systems, the systems of love, are tuned in our early childhood to love and care and trust or otherwise.
Yes, the love from the mother or from the father. I'm not sure if I'm formulating this exactly correct, but in one of your talks, you said that in your lab you found that the oxytocin levels, am I correct, of caring fathers are the same. They are equally high. So
Right. So we did a lot of work in fathers, not just in typical fathers, but also we followed for over a decade children who are growing with two fathers who had an infant by surrogacy. So these are children who are raised without mother from birth. And we show how the father's brain, when there is a need to protect the child, the father brain reorganizes and looks exactly like the maternal brain when the father is the primary caregiver. And those kids, we are now seeing them, they're 12 years old. And we looked high and low in every hormone, every developmental skill. We look at their brain and we don't see difference as a group in children growing up with two dads and children growing up with two moms. But you do see very big differences between children growing up with sensitive and synchronous parents and those. So sensitivity and synchrony and putting the child first is a quality of a parent. It's not a quality of a gender. It's not mother or father. It's a person who is able to provide synchrony and love and care and consideration and empathy and regulation and warm socialization to the child is the one who would have the caring, would tune the child's brain to love and synchrony and openness.
Fascinating. What about those of us who did not have that wonderful synchronous experience in our childhood? I think you quoted John Bowlby, who said that it is in childhood that we learn to love. And there's a beautiful side to that. It just demonstrates how big of a gift love can be in childhood, much more than any material gift that can be given. But there is a shadow over that, of course, which is that not all of us have that. I know of one study that your lab has conducted on how to improve outcomes after premature birth. So instead of having the child just in an incubator, get as much skin to skin contact, kangaroo care, as it is called, as much as possible, and you get excellent outcomes. But what about those who were born premature and they did not get kangaroo care? What about those whose moms or fathers were the primary caregivers and were depressed and they didn't get your wonderful intervention? Or whose moms had to go to work almost immediately after childbirth because of the lack of proper maternal and paternal leave. Something that this research just demonstrates the importance of having, but not all countries do. So what do you do then as a teenager, as an adult who wants to love, wants to love properly and has love affairs and sees that it's possible, but that there are maybe some burden from that childhood?
So I think what we know is that there is hope, and the hope comes from a biological perspective, okay, not just from what we see as clinicians. Every time we fall in love, when we fall in love with a partner or we form a loving relationship with a close friend, the biology of love opens. And the biology of love is a biology of plasticity. Oxytocin is a system that's implicated in plasticity at all level, at the cellular, at the molecular, at the brain, at the network assembly level, at the behavioral level. So oxytocin really is associated with neuroplasticity. It allows for reorganization of the brain around the new love. You fall in love. All your thoughts, all your emotions, all your cognitions are around that person that 2 weeks ago you didn't even know. So there's something in your brain that has to open and incorporate that person into your own self. It's not just mental. It has to be embedded in neural and physiological system. And those systems that underpin love are systems that open and close the door. Every time you form a new relationship, oxytocin is involved. And then there's a reorganization of that network in the brain. And there's the potential for opening the cage of yourself.
And how do you do it better? How do you do it better if you struggle? You notice that due to shadows from your childhood, not having learned that love, you struggle, you want to try, you can try to some extent, but you do struggle. What would be tools that are either tested by science or that you have good reason to believe work, whether it's therapy, self-help, meditation, dance classes? I mean, what do you think works?
I would say that all of the above that are tools to trigger the biology of love, whether it's mentalization that calms the stress response and allows the biology of love to emerge, whether it's joint movement or dance or even loving actions and hugs and sexual activity, anything that's done in consideration of the other. And I think that therapy that allows you to understand how powerful is the shadows from the past and how the less than successful parenting shaped your brain. Understanding that synchrony is a process of coordination and miscoordination, rupture and repair. And as humans, I think the biology of love tells us this hopeful story that there is a way to succeed even if you haven't succeeded in the past. That each relationship brings new opportunities, not only mentally, but also biologically. That synchrony is a process of practice to learn who is the person, who is the other person, to match their rhythms, to understand their desire, to predict his or her brain state.
Mm,
So
mm, mm,
I think the biology of love is not limiting our scope, but in fact broadening it.
mm.
I am very happy that we end on a hopeful note. Loneliness is one of the major killers. It's one of the plagues of modern generation, and a lot of time people give up and don't try. Synchrony, empathy, the biology of love is out there for the picking, with strangers who would become familiar with friends, with loved ones, with your parents, with your children, with your mentors, with the people that you do joint activity with. So I would like very much to end on a hopeful note.
Professor Ruth Feldman, thank you very, very much for taking the time.
Thank you, Ilari. It was a pleasure to talk to you.